Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. They can see you. The evening was supposed to be a celebration. I had just landed a promotion at work, something I'd been working towards for years, and my closest friends insisted on taking me out to our favorite Chinese restaurant. It was the kind of place that hadn't changed in decades, with flickering neon signs outside and red lanterns hanging from the ceiling, casting a dim, warm glow over the cramped tables. The scent of soy sauce and sizzling beef filled the air as we laughed and reminisced about old times. The clatter of chopsticks against porcelain dishes mixed with the low hum of indistinct conversation. It was comforting, familiar. I had no idea how quickly that comfort would unravel. After the last of the dim sum was gone, the waiter placed a small plate of fortune cookies on the table. As was tradition, everyone grabbed one and cracked it open, eager to see what meaningless piece of wisdom or vague prediction would be inside. I waited until everyone else had their moment before picking up the last cookie, feeling its rough surface between my fingers. With a light snap, I broke it apart and unfolded the tiny slip of paper tucked within. The message was different this time, unnervingly specific. They can see you. The words were simple, but they sent an icy chill down my spine. I chuckled nervously, brushing it off as an odd coincidence, some kind of bad joke. But when I looked up, my heart lurched into my throat. Everyone in the restaurant, every single person, was staring at me. Not just staring, glaring, their eyes wide and unblinking, faces devoid of expression. The lively chatter had fallen into an eerie silence, the clinking of utensils against plates replaced by a dreadful stillness. I swallowed hard, trying to break the tension with humor. Did everyone get the same fortune? I asked, my voice wavering as I forced a laugh. No one responded. My friends, the people I had known for years, continued to stare, their eyes hollow, as if they were looking through me. Panic began to seep in, slow and insidious. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, a primal instinct screaming at me that something was very, very wrong. "Hey, guys, this isn't funny," I said, my tone more desperate now. I reached out to touch my friend Lucy's arm, but she recoiled as if my hand were made of fire. Her eyes, God, those eyes, looked as though they were made of glass, empty and lifeless, yet fixed intently on me. I could hear my pulse thundering in my ears, and the room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. It was as if the entire world had narrowed to this one unbearable moment. I needed to get out. The urge to flee was overwhelming, but my legs felt rooted to the floor, heavy and uncooperative. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, the clatter breaking the oppressive silence. As if released from a spell, my friends blinked and returned to their meals as though nothing had happened. The other patrons resumed their conversations, their stares now replaced with disinterest, the air filled once more with the clamor of a bustling restaurant. But the damage was done. I felt a dark presence in the room, a heavy gaze that I couldn't shake off. My hand trembled as I clutched the fortune, the words etched into my mind, a grim warning that echoed in the depths of my soul. They can see you. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. I left the restaurant in a daze, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. The chilly night air did little to clear the fog of confusion that clouded my thoughts. My friends offered no explanation for their behavior, acting as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. When I tried to bring up the fortune, they shrugged it off, their responses mechanical and devoid of concern. It was as if they hadn't even registered the strange event that had left me rattled to my core. I drove home, the streets eerily deserted, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every shadow seemed to loom larger, every rustling leaf amplified in the stillness of the night. The city lights, usually a comforting backdrop, now felt harsh and alien. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that countless unseen eyes were following my every move. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drenched in cold sweat, the fortune still clenched in my fist like a lifeline. Once inside, I locked the door behind me, bolting it for good measure. My apartment had never felt so empty, so silent. Normally, I'd unwind by watching TV or scrolling through my phone, but tonight, I couldn't focus on anything. The words of the fortune played on a loop in my mind, a broken record that refused to stop spinning. I checked the windows, pulling the curtains tightly shut as if that could somehow block out the eyes that I felt boring into me from the darkness outside. I decided to go to bed early, hoping that sleep would offer some escape from the gnawing anxiety. But as I lay there, the silence of the apartment seemed to grow louder, pressing down on me with an almost physical weight. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from the street sent my heart racing. I tossed and turned, unable to find a comfortable position, the sheets tangling around me like a trap. It was just after midnight when I heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door. My breath caught in my throat, my body tensing as I listened intently. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, drawing closer with each passing second. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic rhythm that matched the growing fear coursing through my veins. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping against hope that it was just my imagination, that the stress of the night was playing tricks on me. But then came the sound of a hand brushing against the door, a soft, almost gentle scraping that sent a jolt of terror through me. I wanted to scream, to cry out, but my voice was caught in my throat, paralyzed by fear. Then, slowly, as if testing the waters, the doorknob began to turn. The soft click of the mechanism echoed in the silence, each second stretching into an eternity. Whoever, or whatever, was on the other side of that door was trying to get in. My mind raced, searching for any logical explanation, but there was none. I was alone in the apartment, no one had followed me home. Yet here I was, lying in the dark, listening to an unseen intruder attempting to breach the last barrier between us. The door creaked open just a crack, a sliver of darkness seeping into the room. I could feel the presence on the other side, malevolent and cold, a tangible force that threatened to overwhelm me. I remained frozen, my body refusing to respond to the primal urge to flee. The air grew thick, stifling, as if the walls themselves were closing in. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the doorknob released, the door clicking shut. Silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence, heavy with the knowledge that something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. I lay there, trembling, staring at the door, knowing deep down that whatever it was, it would be back. The morning light did little to soothe my nerves. I barely slept, haunted by the sound of that doorknob turning in the dead of night. I told myself it was a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But the dark circles under my eyes and the unease settling in the pit of my stomach refused to let me dismiss it so easily. I avoided the mirror as I got ready for work, too afraid of what I might see in my reflection. It wasn't just fatigue, I could feel something had shifted, something within me had changed. Work provided little distraction. The usual banter with coworkers felt hollow, their words muffled and distant. I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, as though invisible eyes were tracking my every move. My office, once a sanctuary of productivity, now felt oppressive. The overhead lights buzzed with an irritating hum, the shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more sinister. By lunchtime, I could hardly focus, the paperwork in front of me blurring into a meaningless mess. In a desperate attempt to regain some semblance of control, I left the office early, heading back to my apartment. The streets seemed quieter than usual, the buildings looming like silent sentinels. I avoided making eye contact with anyone, the memory of the restaurant still fresh in my mind. As I neared my building, I felt a strange compulsion to look over my shoulder. The street was empty, but the sensation of being watched only intensified. Once inside my apartment, I went straight to the bathroom. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to wash away the unease that clung to me like a second skin. I forced myself to look into the mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone else staring back at me. At first, it was just my reflection, pale and drawn. But as I continued to stare, something shifted. The room behind me seemed to darken, the corners of the mirror distorting as if the glass were melting. My reflection's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a strange disconnect, like I was looking at a stranger wearing my face. Suddenly, the reflection moved on its own, its expression twisting into a cruel, mocking grin that didn't match the fear etched on my actual face. My breath hitched as I watched my mirrored self lift a hand, something I wasn't doing, and tap the glass from the inside. The sound was soft but unmistakable, a hollow knock that echoed in the tiny bathroom. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, nearly slipping on the tiled floor. But the reflection didn't follow my retreat. It remained there, tapping insistently on the glass, as if it were trying to get out. I bolted from the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me. My mind raced, desperately trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Maybe it was stress-induced, some kind of psychological break. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong with that mirror, something that was growing stronger, more tangible. The fortune's warning echoed in my mind, mingling with the memory of the night before. They could see me, whatever they were, they had found me. And now, they were reaching out, trying to cross over into my world. The rest of the day passed in a haze of dread. I avoided the bathroom entirely, opting instead to spend the evening sitting in my living room, every light in the apartment turned on. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, invitations to meet up or chat, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I felt isolated, trapped in my own home by the creeping terror that had taken root in my life. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside made me jump, my senses on high alert for any sign of the presence I knew was lurking. As the night deepened, I found myself drawn back to the bathroom door. I didn't want to go inside, but something pulled me toward it, a magnetic force that I couldn't resist. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, the cold metal biting against my skin. With a deep breath, I turned it and pushed the door open, the bathroom now bathed in an unnatural darkness that the overhead light couldn't fully dispel. The mirror stood there, innocent and ordinary, but I knew better. Taking slow, hesitant steps, I approached it, my reflection once again appearing as it should. But the unease didn't fade. I could feel it, the thing on the other side, waiting. And as I stood there, I knew it was only a matter of time before it found a way through. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, afraid to sleep, to leave my apartment, even to be alone with my own thoughts. Every time I walked past the bathroom, I felt the pull of the mirror, as if it were calling out to me, demanding my attention. I couldn't bring myself to look at it directly, but I knew it was there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. It was only a matter of time before it made its move. On the third night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. The oppressive feeling in my apartment had become unbearable, the sense of being watched more intense than ever. I knew I had to do something, to confront whatever it was that had taken root in my life. I wasn't sure what I was dealing with, whether it was a ghost, a demon, or something even worse. But I knew that I couldn't let it continue to haunt me. I needed answers, and I needed to reclaim my life. Arming myself with a heavy flashlight, the closest thing I had to a weapon, I made my way to the bathroom. The air was thick with anticipation, the shadows seeming to dance at the edges of my vision. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned the doorknob, the creak of the door echoing ominously in the quiet apartment. The mirror greeted me with its cold, silent presence, reflecting the fear in my eyes. I stepped into the room, the tiles cold under my bare feet. I approached the mirror with trepidation, raising the flashlight as if it could somehow ward off whatever was on the other side. For a long moment, nothing happened. It was just me, standing in front of my own reflection, breathing heavily. But then, as if on cue, the lights flickered and the mirror darkened, my reflection fading into the shadows. In its place, a figure began to emerge, something twisted and grotesque, its features barely human. Its eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, bored into mine, filled with a malevolent hunger that made my blood run cold. The figure in the mirror moved, its hand pressing against the glass from the inside, its fingers long and gnarled. It was trying to come through, to breach the thin barrier that separated our worlds. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it push against the glass, the surface rippling like water. The thing's mouth twisted into a sinister smile, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The room grew colder, the lights flickering more violently as the presence in the mirror grew stronger, more tangible. I knew I couldn't just stand there and let it cross over. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I swung the flashlight at the mirror with all my strength. The glass shattered on impact, shards flying in every direction. But instead of breaking the connection, it seemed to intensify it. The figure didn't disappear, it grew clearer, more solid, as if the broken glass had only made it easier for it to escape. The bathroom was plunged into darkness, the air thick with the scent of something foul and decaying. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as the thing in the mirror began to crawl out, its body contorting unnaturally as it pulled itself through the jagged shards. Its movements were slow and deliberate, each step bringing it closer to me. The sense of dread was overwhelming, the air crackling with malevolent energy. I wanted to run, to get out of the apartment, but my legs refused to cooperate. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The creature stood before me now, towering over me, its presence suffocating. It leaned in close, its breath cold and rancid against my skin. "They can see you," it whispered, its voice a guttural rasp that echoed in my mind. I realized then that it wasn't just one creature, there were many, all of them watching, waiting. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their hunger, their desire to consume me. In a final, desperate act, I turned and bolted for the door, but it was too late. The creature's hand shot out, grabbing my arm with a grip like iron. I screamed, the sound echoing off the walls as it pulled me back toward the mirror, its strength inhuman. The glass, now a swirling vortex of darkness, seemed to expand, drawing me in. The last thing I saw was my reflection, twisted and distorted, merging with the creature as I was dragged into the abyss. Darkness enveloped me, the cold seeping into my bones, and I knew I was lost. But the last words of the fortune still echoed in my mind as I was swallowed whole by the darkness. "They can see you." And they were still watching. Hey! Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Postcards. It started with a single postcard, as innocent as any other. The image on the front depicted a familiar sight, the decrepit town square of Havenbrook, where the once bustling heart of the community had long since stopped beating. Faded banners hung from skeletal street lamps, and the cobblestones were cracked and overrun with weeds. On the back, in neat, careful handwriting, was a simple message: "Wish you were here." The first time it arrived, I laughed, thinking it was some prank. My old friends used to joke about Havenbrook, the town we all left behind. We were among the last to go, escaping the dying town as it crumbled under the weight of despair and disrepair. Havenbrook was nothing but a ghost town now, and everyone knew it, abandoned for nearly 30 years after the mines dried up and the remaining residents fled or disappeared. No one lived there anymore. No one could live there. Yet the postmark on the card was fresh, dated just a few days before. The address was clear, directed to my tiny apartment in the city. I stared at the card for longer than I'd like to admit before tossing it onto my kitchen counter, resolving to forget it. But as the days passed, more postcards began to arrive, each more unsettling than the last. One showed the old school, its windows dark and broken. Another captured the church, where I used to sit with my parents every Sunday. In each one, the town looked more decayed, more sinister. The messages were brief and haunting, repeating the same phrase with slight variations: "Wish you were here." "Havenbrook misses you." "Why did you leave?" I tried to reach out to the few people who had once lived there, but every number I dialed led to dead air. Those who I could still contact laughed it off, as I had once done. They assured me no one had been back to Havenbrook for years. I even called the postal service, but they were as baffled as I was. No record of any deliveries from that region in decades. My curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me towards the place I had sworn I'd never return to. The postcards kept coming, a relentless whisper in the back of my mind. I began to dream of Havenbrook, the streets more twisted and nightmarish in my sleep than I remembered. Finally, after a month of silence from the rest of the world and the constant, gnawing reminders from Havenbrook, I made the decision to return. I packed lightly, a bag with essentials, a flashlight, and my old key to my childhood home, which I hadn't touched in years. As I drove through the winding roads that led back to the town, I noticed how little had changed in the surrounding woods. They were still dense and dark, with branches that seemed to reach out like skeletal hands. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, thick with a sense of unease that settled deep into my bones. As I crossed the threshold into Havenbrook, a chill swept over me. The town lay in eerie silence, as though it had been frozen in time, waiting for my return. The buildings were in worse condition than the postcards had shown, with walls collapsing in on themselves and roofs caved in. The silence was suffocating, the kind that made your heart pound louder just to remind you that you were still alive. I parked the car near the town square, the same square from the first postcard, and stepped out onto the cracked pavement. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and rot, and every shadow seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision. There, lying on the ground by the fountain that had long since dried up, was another postcard. I picked it up with trembling hands. This one showed my old house, its windows shattered, the door hanging off its hinges. The message on the back was different this time, more urgent. "Welcome home." My childhood home loomed in front of me like a decaying corpse, its walls covered in creeping vines, the wood warped and splintered. The front door, barely hanging by a single hinge, creaked as I pushed it open. The interior was shrouded in darkness, the only light filtering through the cracked windows, casting eerie shadows that danced across the floor. I hesitated at the threshold, the weight of years pressing down on me, memories flooding back in a wave of unease. But the thought of those postcards, the words that had taunted me for weeks, pushed me forward. The inside was even worse than I had imagined. Dust and cobwebs covered every surface, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. The furniture, once familiar and comforting, now seemed foreign and sinister, as if it had been placed by someone who only half remembered what it was supposed to be like. I wandered through the rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. The kitchen, where my mother used to cook, was now a mess of broken cabinets and shattered glass. The living room, where we had spent countless nights in front of the fireplace, was cold and lifeless, the hearth choked with ash. As I moved deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, set my nerves on edge. I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something. But there was nothing. Only the oppressive silence of the house that had once been my home. In the hallway, I spotted something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A trail of muddy footprints, leading up the stairs. The prints were fresh, damp with water that glistened in the dim light. My heart raced as I followed them, each step bringing me closer to whatever awaited at the top. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the air grew colder the higher I climbed, as though the warmth was being sucked out of the house itself. At the landing, the footprints led to a door I knew all too well, my old bedroom. The door was ajar, just enough to see a sliver of the darkness inside. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The memories of my childhood flooded back, nights spent hiding under the covers, listening to the house creak and groan, convinced that something was lurking just outside my door. My parents had always assured me it was just the house settling, but now, standing there, I wasn't so sure. I pushed the door open, and the sight that greeted me nearly sent me running. The room was exactly as I remembered it, down to the smallest detail. The bed was neatly made, the walls adorned with posters of bands I hadn't thought about in years, and on the desk sat my old typewriter, a relic from a time before laptops and smartphones. But the air was thick with a presence, something I couldn't see but could feel, heavy and oppressive. And then, I saw it, a figure standing in the corner, barely visible in the shadows. It was a man, or at least what had once been a man. His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that jutted out at odd angles. His eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to suck in the light around them. And he was smiling, a twisted, grotesque smile that sent chills down my spine. He raised a hand, and in it, he held a postcard. He stepped forward, extending it towards me, and I could see the image on the front, a picture of the house, exactly as it was now, decayed and rotten. The message on the back was written in the same neat, careful handwriting as the others, but this one was different. It wasn't an invitation or a question. It was a command. Stay. I backed away from the figure, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing tighter as if trying to trap me inside. My breath came in shallow, panicked gasps as I stared at the postcard in his hand. The word stay burned itself into my mind, a command I couldn't shake. But I couldn't stay. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of this house and never look back. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot, as if some unseen force was holding me in place. The figure in the corner took another step towards me, his smile widening into something almost predatory. You left us, he said, his voice a hollow echo that seemed to come from all around me rather than from his lips. You abandoned Havenbrook. I tried to speak, to ask him what he wanted, but the words caught in my throat. My mind was a whirl of confusion and fear, memories of the town flooding back in a chaotic jumble. Had I abandoned Havenbrook? Had I left something behind, something that had festered and grown in the shadows of this decaying town? The figure's eyes bore into mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt, though I couldn't say for what. I finally managed to choke out, but the figure cut me off with a wave of his hand. The room seemed to warp and shift, the walls bending inward as if the house itself was alive, reacting to his presence. You did, he hissed, and I could feel his breath, cold and stale, brush against my face. You all left us here to rot, to be forgotten. Suddenly, the walls around me began to pulse, like the beating of a heart, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the house, many footsteps, all moving in unison. I turned to the doorway, expecting to see another figure, but there was nothing there. Yet the footsteps grew louder, closer, until it sounded as though an entire crowd was marching up the stairs towards my room. Panic surged through me, and I finally found the strength to move. I bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me and racing down the hallway. But the house had changed. It was no longer the familiar layout I had grown up in. The corridors twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, and every door I opened led to another hall, another dead end. The sound of the footsteps was everywhere now, a maddening cacophony that pounded in my ears. I didn't stop running until I stumbled into what should have been the living room, but instead of the dusty old furniture, I found myself in a vast, empty space. The walls were gone, replaced by endless darkness that stretched out in all directions. In the center of the room stood a single figure, different from the one I had seen before. This one was taller, more imposing, draped in tattered robes that fluttered in an unseen wind. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning through the shadows. Why did you come back? His voice was deep and resonant, filled with an ancient sorrow that sent shivers down my spine. You were meant to leave, to forget. I don't know, I whispered, the truth spilling out of me. I didn't know why I had returned, why I hadn't simply thrown the postcards away and forgotten about Havenbrook like everyone else. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe guilt, or maybe some deeper connection to the town that I had never truly understood. I just had to. The figure shook his head slowly, and I felt the weight of his disappointment. You should not have come back. This place is not for the living. We belong to the shadows now. The darkness around us began to swirl, creeping closer, reaching out with tendrils that wrapped around my ankles, pulling me down. I struggled against them, but they were too strong, dragging me towards the center of the room where the figure stood, his presence growing larger, more oppressive. You cannot leave, he intoned, and his words echoed in the void. You are part of this now. Part of us. The shadows closed in, and as they enveloped me, I heard the whispers of the town, the voices of those who had been left behind, calling my name, welcoming me back. And then, just as the darkness swallowed me whole, I saw it, another postcard, floating in the air before me. It showed a picture of the town square, but this time, there was a figure standing in the middle, staring out at the viewer with hollow eyes. It was me. The end. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Thanks for watching.